remind members and officials and those in the gallery, if you have mobile phones, turn them off or to flight mode. They interfere both with the meeting and, of course, with the recording. Apologies have been received from Deputy Bailey, my apologies. Imuchtir were uploaded for the Select Committee meeting on the 28th of February 2019, dealing with the Civil Registration Bill. Are the Imuchtir agreed? Agreed. I'd like to welcome Minister Doherty and our officials to the meeting. I'd like to thank you also for the briefing material provided, which has been circulated to the members. This meeting has been convened to consider the revised estimate for Vote 37, Employment Affairs and Social Protection, which was referred by the Dáil to the committee with the instruction to report back to the Dáil. While the committee has no role in actually approving the estimate, there is an opportunity for the committee to make the process more transparent and to engage in a meaningful way on relevant performance issues. I propose to proceed with the Minister to make her opening statements, and after that I will afford members an opportunity to raise issues with the Minister. Minister, if you'd like to.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the invitation to come and discuss with you today the revised estimates for the Department. Our officials have provided you with detailed briefing material for use at the meeting, which includes comprehensive financial and recipient data, and the briefing also provides updates from the Department's performance in its outputs for 2018 last year. On foot of the observations made by the Chairman at last year's meeting, indeed it was your good self, the briefing this year provides hopefully for a clearer comparison with last year's actual expenditure and the estimates for 2019. The tables have been provided which show last year's outturn, excluding the payment of the Christmas bonus, allowing for a like-for-like comparison. Additional columns have also been included which explain the variance between the actual expenditure of 2018 and the estimates for 2019, and I hope this provides more clarity for the committee. As members will know, the work of the Department is very broad in scope, and it has widened actually over the last number of years, because through the life cycle the Department offers services and income supports from people, from the payment of child benefit to supporting people right through income supports until they reach pensionable age. The Department's expenditure at $20.5 billion for 2019 is the largest of any government department and accounts for 35% of gross government expenditure. And to put this in perspective, every week over 1.3 million people, pensioners, people with disabilities, people on maternity leave or sick leave, widowers, carers or job seekers, they all receive a payment from the Department. In addition, over 628,000 families receive child benefit each and every month in respect of 1.2 million children. And with this level of expenditure, we have to ensure that our social protection system is properly structured and that it provides support for people when they need it the most. We also aim to ensure that the system is flexible enough to deal with the changes in the economy and society so that we are ready to deal with changes and challenges if they emerge. Without the social transfers we provide, I think we would see a society where poverty and social exclusion would be much more extreme and acute. So I know we're very grateful to be able to do that. As I've mentioned, $20.5 billion represents 35% of the gross government expenditure, and it's useful, I think, just for a few moments to talk about where this money is spent. The single biggest block of expenditure in 2019 will be, again this year, our pensioners, with over €8 billion, or 39% of our overall expenditure allocated to this particular vote. And as our population ages, and thankfully people are living longer, healthier lives, an increasing portion of the Department's expenditure is going to be on pension provision and providing income support for people in their older and longer years. Expenditure on illness, disability and carers payments announced to $4.4 billion in 2019, which represents 22% of our expenditure. And we will see a further reduction this year in expenditure on working age income support schemes, largely driven by, thankfully, the ongoing downward trend in the number of job seekers. Working age income supports this year will account for 16% of our output, or $3.2 billion this year. That also includes one-parent families, maternity and paternity payments and supplementary welfare allowances, as well as job seekers. In parallel, Chair, the expenditure on employment supports, including community employment, our back to education allowances, TUS, our rural social schemes and the various other employment and activation programmes that we run, amounts to some $724 million this year, or 3.5% of the Department's expenditure. Again, expenditure on working age employment supports is decreasing, which reflects the reduced demand in the context of rising employment and the reductions in unemployment, which I know we all think is great. Expenditure on children and families will account for over 13%, or $2.7 billion, of which $2.1 billion is spent on child benefit and $416 million is spent on working family payment supports. Expenditure on supplementary payments like rent supplements on our agencies such as Citizens Information Board and miscellaneous services accounts for 806 million, or just 4% of expenditure. As I mentioned, 2018 saw a continuing fall in the live register and improvements in the labour market, and last week the live register was at 193,300 people, which is over 37,000 people lower than it was this time last year and 75,000 people lower than it was 2 years ago. And although that's really great and it's very, very welcome, the very last thing we need to do is to forget the people who are still unemployed. The Department's schemes and services are continuously adapting to ensure that we encourage movement from unemployment to employment or training, and that we support people through activation services and employment opportunities and programmes where they need additional help to find a job. In Budget 2019, my second budget as Minister, I sought to focus on encouraging employment and supporting families, particularly with children. Building on the increases that were made in 2017 and 2018, people receiving weekly social welfare payments saw another increase in their rates, with €5 being added to the maximum weekly rates of payments. I think it's actually happening this week. With proportionate increases are also provided to qualified adults. And again, these increases will benefit pensioners, people with disabilities, carers, job seekers, and they do take effect from this week. Over the last 4 budgets, we have tried to increase the main weekly rates of payments by €15 per week and the main rates of state pension by €18 per week. This year we are again increasing the rate for qualified children. Last year, I think, was the first year we did it. This year the rate is being increased this week by €2.20 for children up to the age of 12 and €5.20 for children ages 12 years and over, and the rates are now €34 and €37 per week respectively. This represents increases for children in households dependent upon social welfare, and it's a direct response to the evidence presented by St Vincent de Paul, the Vincenzian Partnership and Bernardo's, that the cost of raising children and caring for children increase once that child reaches his or her secondary school years. The rate of daily expenses allowance, which was formerly known as the direct provision allowance, has been increased to the levels that were recommended to me in the McMahon report. The rate for an adult will rise by €17.80 to €38.80, and for children it will rise by €8.20 to €29.80. The income disregard for lone parents is again this year being increased by €20 to bring it to €150 per week, and a new disregard for maintenance payments, which are used towards housing costs, will be introduced into the working family payment. Chair, 2019 will see the introduction of a new job seekers benefit payment for the self-employed. My department and I are currently working through the finer details of the scheme, which will provide a safety net not currently available to those people setting up and running their own businesses and providing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs for others. In addition, a new parental benefit scheme will be introduced later this year, which will allow both parents to access paid parental leave within the first year of their child's life. Some other measures include the fuel allowance season being extended by 1 week, which will be paid in April. A new hot school meals pilot programme is almost ready to be rolled out. Our proof of concept started in January of this year, and it's going incredibly well. And this will be provided in 36 schools this year. And if it's successful, and I've absolutely no doubt it will be, my aim is to extend the scheme to a much wider audience. And we're also commissioning research into the cost of disability, which I hope will be able to inform this committee and my own department into future policy directions, indeed services and payments in this area. Chair, the Department has also provided briefing in relation to progress against claims processing targets. I know it's something that's very important to this committee. For many of the Department schemes, claims are processed within or close to the Department's processing time standards. 2018 saw significant improvements in processing times for domiciliary care allowance. However, for some schemes, the processing time standards were not achieved in 2018, particularly for illness-related schemes. We took additional staff and they were assigned to the carers allowance area in mid-October, and this resulted in a 35% reduction in the number of claims awaiting decision by the end of February 2019 compared to the end of September 2018. And given that this reduction in claims pending, it's expected that the claims processing times will improve in the coming weeks, but we will be watching it carefully and will reallocate if it doesn't. As I've said before, the Department is committed to ensuring that our claims are processed as quickly, as efficiently as possible, and that delays, when necessary, are kept to a minimum. I think it's also worth mentioning again that anybody who is awaiting a decision can always have the opportunity to contact social welfare offices to get a payment whilst they're waiting for their applications to be processed. Chair, in comparing the Department's expenditure in 2018 with the allocation for 2019, I think it's important to note the variances in expenditure on most social welfare schemes are typically explained by a combination of factors, including downward trends in the recipient numbers, changes in the average weekly payment values, the differences in the number of paydays in any given year. And in addition, comparisons between 2018 and 2019 expenditure were further impacted by the measures introduced in the budget 2019, including the increases in the weekly rates of payments, the carryover costs of the budget from 2018 measures, and the payments of a 100% Christmas bonus in 2018, which cost £265 million. Provision for the bonus is made subject to the financial position of the state in October of each year as part of the budgetary process, and is not included, therefore, in the revised estimates. But as I mentioned at the outset, I hope the revised presentation to this year's committee's brief provides greater clarity than we did last year. And I'd just like to finish off by saying that whilst, Chairman, we do clearly probably now more than ever live in uncertain times, what I and my department intend to do is to keep delivering some certainty to people when they meet challenges in their lives. The department are there to support people during those times when they, for one reason or another, just can't support themselves. Unfortunately, I suppose, as our economy has improved, we've been in a position to provide greater resources for improvements to our social welfare system. My statement this afternoon has sought to provide the committee with an overall, I suppose, scale and scope of what the department actually does and how many people it reaches, and I suppose how we couldn't actually manage without it. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister, for your opening statement. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge both you and the officials, specifically the change in the manner in which you presented them, dealing with the Christmas bonus, because now you're comparing like with like, and I think it's a truer reflection. So thank you for making that change. I just want to make two specific points, and then I'll open it. One, Minister, you mentioned in relation to the Christmas bonus, and that, you know, it's not included. It's a decision that's made depending on the finances come October. I think we need to move away from that situation, because the people who are the recipients and the beneficiaries of the Christmas bonus have it almost built into their annual expectation, and they have an expensive time of year that they don't have the capacity, most people, to get through Christmas without this payment. It's not a luxury, it has become a necessity, and I think we need to, and you can comment later, but I do think that we need to build it in to the core fund, to the annual basis, rather than being an option that comes about by chance or by good fortune that the books. I think it should be built in from day one. And secondly, and I'll conclude on this and I'll allow others, Minister, you opened, and the first thing you mentioned were pensions. A year ago we were talking to you about the anomaly with the people in receipt of pensions since 2012. That hasn't been addressed in full. There's still a lot of people and a lot who are, and perhaps you'd like to, I suppose, bring us up to date on that matter first, because I'm sure others will have concerns. But I suppose going back a year, we would have thought that this would have been complete by now, and I suppose the concern is a significant number of people don't know where they stand, and I suppose more importantly, we don't know when the entire process will be complete.
For what it's worth, I'm all for providing certainty and stability in our payments. I think that's evidenced by what I'm attempting to do with regard to social welfare payments, and so I very much welcome your intervention today, so thank you for that. T12. Sorry, thank you. I think I've said on numbers of occasions that once the legislation passed and the regulations were signed, that we would start the review process with the some 80-odd thousand people. I think you're well aware that each of them have received letters and they've all been invited to come forward, and where there are gaps in their payments or in their contribution history, to fill in those gaps. I think, and I may be wrong, you'd be making the assumption that the onus on providing the information is from the department, and we can only go as fast as the information is given to us, Chair. So we have invited all of the people who have gaps to come forward and to fill out those gaps. And as that information is provided to us, those reviews are being taken place. And in the main, I think I have some 8,500 people have already received a completed review and have been given a payment. There is no delay on the department. I think you're aware that we took on some 120 people specifically to do this job and to do nothing else. They're in our offices on a daily basis, and they're receiving the information from the people who were adversely affected by the changes in 2012. And those reviews are happening on a daily basis, and some thousands are happening awarded their payments, or maybe in some cases the reviews are being given and there is no change to the payment. And I think that breakdown is between about 80% and 20%. So of the people who are providing us with the information, 80% of them are getting an uplift, and it's backdated to March of last year. Those people who are not have no change to their rates of payment at all, and they just carry on. But I can only go as fast as the information is provided to us. But we will be here as long as there are people outstanding information to us. They will get continued contact from us and service from us, and we won't be stopping until everybody's review is done.
Minister, can I ask you specifically, because just to clarify on the gaps, you said that where there are gaps, then the onus is on the individual to supply the information. Yeah. I was under the impression that if the information resided in the department, so in other words, if there were child benefit payments and whatever, that would be done first. It would be other gaps that the claimant might have to deal with. So in other words, if somebody was out of work, we'll just say for a 10-year period, and they had children, obviously the department would have that data in terms of children's allowance. Do they have to supply it, or is the department doing that automatically?
No, well, the automatically is the bit that's probably at variance. So everybody has to have a review, and so whether it's conducted by the information within the department that's held, the review still has to take place. And so, for argument's sake, if I'm one of the operatives in Sligo and I'm checking your record, I still have to go and check your record. If I can find all of the gaps within your record, well, then I can conduct that review without intervention with you, and that review will obviously happen a little bit faster than if I was to have gaps still, having conducted with or found the information within our own internal systems, and there were still gaps, then I will invite you to come and fill those gaps. But there are 87,000 records that need to be gone through. Each and every one of them has to go through a review by one of the 120 members of staff that were there. So obviously, if there's no gaps and we get to you, we didn't pick all of the ones with no gaps and get them done first. I don't think that would have been fair to the people that would have had gaps, so they would have been left. I think it's been done relatively chronologically, but everybody will be got to, and anybody that has information to give us will be encouraged to share that information as quickly as possible. And actually, I'm being told now that almost 24,000 requests for information have been issued to date. And actually, less than half of the people have responded so far. And
another 11,000 to be issued shortly.
Yeah.
The final piece on this, and I'll move on from this. Was there any preparatory work done on this from the time we sort of devised the scheme, or you came up with the scheme, and the passing of the relevant legislation, or did it all just kick in after the legislation?
No, we would have been recruiting the staff, getting the operation, the IT systems ready. All of that was done. Now, maybe it shouldn't have been done before the regulations were signed, but all of that preparatory work. So literally, when the regulations were signed, our team and staff were ready to push buttons and send out letters, and that's exactly what happened.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Dea.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank the Minister and her officials for her presentation and for the information provided. I have to say, however, that the supplementary information, this particular document, I only received yesterday afternoon. Maybe other people received it sooner. I can only speak for myself. Just a few minor points, Minister. There is a substantial saving on job seekers' allowance, as you will be aware, from the increase in employment or the drop in unemployment. That also feeds through to the supplementary welfare allowance. But I noticed that there's a very sharp drop in the budget for exceptional needs from 43.8 million to 38.5 million. I just want to clarify, is that scheme demand-led? Is there any specific provision for that? Because it has been represented to me in the past that people have said simply on that exceptional needs fund, people locally at the social welfare office locally, that we're out of money. That wouldn't be correct, I take it. It's demand-led. Okay. The other thing I want to ask the Minister is, I noticed there was a small sum of 2 million provided to extend job seekers' benefit to the self-employed. in the provision for 2019. When is that scheme due to kick in? In relation to the working age employment supports, quite a sharp drop in the take-up and therefore the payment out in respect of Back to Work Enterprise Allowance Scheme and the Back to Education Allowance Scheme. I wonder if the figures aren't contained here, you might provide me with just the overall figures of the number of people on each one of those schemes at present.
Education and what was the other, really?
All of them, the Community Employment, Rural Social Scheme, TOOS, JI, Back to Work Enterprise Allowance and the Back to Education. Sure. In relation to carers allowance, there has been an increase, I think of what, 4,000 to 5,000 or something in the number of people in receipt of carers allowance. But nevertheless, I'd say about 75 to 80% of carers in this country don't get any payment. They don't qualify for carers allowance for one reason or another. Can I just ask the Minister, representations have been made by the association representing carers and others for some flexibility here in relation to the rules governing carers allowance. For example, there's a specific proposal, I think, from Carers Ireland that the amount of time you're allowed to spend working outside the home be increased from 15 hours to, say, 18 and a half hours. Would the officials have any idea of how much that might cost? And could I also ask the Minister, how many people, are there many people in receipt of this carer support grant who are not actually getting carers allowance? Do we have a figure for that? Yeah. In relation to the disability activation supports, I notice there's a slight drop in that. Now, you see, one of the big problems that we hear coming up on a regular basis is the problem in relation to people with disabilities getting into the workforce. As the Minister will be aware, unemployment is very, very high amongst people with disabilities, and it's generally accepted that not only must these people be helped, supported to get into the workforce, but they must be supported while they're in the workforce, to adjust to the workforce. And the provisions that are there seem to be grossly inadequate. And here we see a situation where instead of an increase in provision, there's a slight drop. Rent supplement is down from 176 million to 132 million, but of course that's because of the transfer to HAP. Would the Minister have an overall figure now of how much is paid between both HAP and rent supplement?
I don't think so. But
currently. Back to work family dividend, is that coming to an end? Is that ending this year? Is that? No? All right. On the control, in relation to control measures, I wonder would the Minister have any figures for the amount recovered in the last period for which we can measure, the last 12 months, the last 2018, I presume. The amount recovered from people because of overpayments and the amount of that that's attributable to direct fraud. Can we have something on that? And finally, I just want to ask the Minister, there's an increase of about 6,000, I notice, in the amount of people in receipt of invalidity pensions. And invalidity pensions, of course, have now been extended to the self-employed. What percentage of the overall payment of invalidity pensions now is attributable to self-employed? How many self-employed people, in other words, have applied for and received the invalidity pension? I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Minister, would you like, because they're fairly technical and so as we don't get mixed up and confused with all the numbers, would you like to address them as we go?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
I just asked the Chair, I have to leave in a few moments, but I just asked two questions.
Absolutely.
Before, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I asked Deputy Brady beforehand. I just wanted to raise the point about the percentage of population at risk of poverty, and the 2017 and 2018 are not yet available. When will they be coming in on the basis that we have the report from Social St Vincent de Paul in relation to the lone parents figures? It's gone drastically bad from 2017, and I just think while there has been move towards, and as you said, the income disregard and all that for lone parents has helped, and people welcome that. According to that report, we have an awful long way to go, and we're going to have to look at ways that we can deal with that. And the only other point I want to raise, youth unemployment rate, 16.8% 2017 and 14.3% this year. It's one area that doesn't seem to have gone down in any, really has a real impact. I think the long term was 4.3 in 2016, it's 2.1 now this year. Youth employment 16.8 and 14.3. there's been no real impact on that. And the last point I really want to raise, other departments on page 176 is number of Magdalene Commission customers in payment. I think the department has to be a bit more sensitive as regards Magdalene survivors, and maybe put down Magdalene survivors on that rather than customers. You know, it just sounds very clinical.
Thank you, Deputy Collins. Minister.
Can I just answer that particular one, right? And it's not to be disrespectful to the survivors from the Magdalene laundries, and I think I've had this conversation here before. I hate the term customers. We don't have customers.
Yeah.
But we also don't just serve citizens, because there's a whole lot of people who are not Irish citizens that we don't serve. So can we collectively come up with
something,
a new name, please? Because it's, I mean, I desperately try to call people recipients, but then you feel like you're talking about robots, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, just for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, I
thank you, Joan. Can I do Joan first so she can go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't understand why the data is 2 years behind.
Yeah.
I absolutely don't have any idea. So the next time I'm getting silk data is in 2019, December this year. So I won't know. And I'm hopeful that when you look at the report that we got a couple of months ago that still shows a devastating picture of the impact of policy changes and cuts to particularly lone parents, I'm very hopeful that the stuff that we've done last year and the year before will have had a positive impact, along with the fact that I know an awful lot of our lone parents are now working in much better jobs than they would have been a couple of years ago. But what I really want to see is the data where we still have the problem, so that we can hone in and see exactly who is left, who hasn't benefited from the changes that we've made, and then for us to decide collectively what next needs to be done. Because it isn't a case of that we can just keep increasing a disregard if the disregard isn't hitting certain women because they're not working. And you know, while the increase in the QCI is welcome, we're not going to get increase of QCI by 20% every single year. So we need to look specifically and target at the people who are not benefiting from the changes that we've made. But I won't have that data until later on this year. So, and yeah, the youth unemployment isn't going down as fast as our long-term unemployment and our normal unemployed numbers. And I'm really hopeful that the pilot programme that we launched, which is the YES programme a couple of months ago, will have an impact. Now, I've originally asked for a certain amount of funding. We had to go through the pilot project for 6 months before I can get increased funding on that programme. We're about 4 months into the 6 months, and so I would expect to have a good preliminary report on the success of YES in the next couple of months, and then I might be here looking for more money. But anyway, we have to address, and it has to be, I think, employer-led. It isn't a case of just taking some of our young people and sending them to college or sending them to an employment scheme, or I think it has to be specifically more tailored, and it has to be in the employment environment. And that's why I'm really kind of hopeful that the YES project will actually work. But I'll come back to you on it once I have something. Right.
Thanks,
First of all, Deputy O'Dea, the vast majority of our schemes are demand-led. I don't know who would have said to you anecdotally that we run out of money. The emergency needs payments and the exceptional needs payments never run out of money. I say that's probably easy for me to say given that it's not my money that we're spending, but the reason they're there is to help people at a time where they can't and have nobody else to go to, and we never say no. But the policy is as the policy is, and it has changed slightly somewhat over the last number of years, arising from conversations that we would have had here, but we never run out of money and we do not say no. The self-employed, the reason it's only 2 million, it looks like it's a very small, miserable amount of money in this year's, but we're only going to be bringing the legislation to Cabinet probably either next week or the week after. Then it'll obviously have to come to the House and all that kind of good stuff. I expect, notwithstanding any difficulties, that legislation will be passed hopefully by maybe the autumn, and that we could go live October, November. And so that's why there's a small amount of money. I think when you gross it up maybe to a full year, it somewhat might look more like 35 million next year maybe. And actually, I hope it doesn't look like that, because we're not expecting people to be out of work. But anyway, that's what it's there. It's only a support. We'll come back to you with regard to the activation schemes, the Back to Education. There's a long list. We actually have it here. You can have a look at it before you go if you want. But I can get your hard copy and get it sent to you. Carers allowance. So the Carers Support Grant, there's 116,860 people receive it. There are 80,989 people who receive Carers Allowance. There are 2,740 people who receive Carers Benefit. But there are a whole lot of people who receive an incapacitated tax credit that wouldn't qualify for either carers allowance or carers benefit, and they are also in receipt of the carers support grant, and so that would make up the difference. Those two incapacitated tax credits both relate to children and older members of the family, and that is what would amount to the difference. The supports that we do, I suppose, around disabilities. You may be aware that we launched an ability programme last year, which was specific money that we got and that we matched in Ireland with money from the European Union. And it was to specific tailor employment opportunities and supports when in employment of young adults with disabilities. And we were oversubscribed probably by about threefold. For the amount of organisations that wanted to run programmes. Some of them started last year. They're really, look, I don't need to tell you, but they're absolutely wonderful organisations, and they're providing huge and very valuable supports. I was out in Airfield a couple of months ago with the Walk organisation, and there were some just fabulous young people there who are 10 foot tall, with their jobs, with the support mechanisms they have, with the mentors they have. Actually, interestingly enough, one of the things that was raised with me that particular day, and you may also be aware that the government in our departments and our government agencies and all the states' agencies have now to increase the percentage of people that they have in employment from what I think was 3% to 4% of people with disabilities. But one of the things that was raised with me that day was by a mum who has this gorgeous young fella. He's maybe in his 20s, 21, and far more intelligent than I would ever aspire to ever be, but the application for public jobs is something that he finds exceptionally difficult. And when I came back and I discovered that the application for all of our public jobs is exactly the same for people with a disability, whether it's intellectual or physical, than it is for people who haven't, that really doesn't quite sit well. And he actually joked with me that day. He said that he felt some of the questions were trick questions, so that he'd answered the same question differently twice and we'd be able to say, ha, you can't have the job. And actually, apparently that's a profile testing that we do, but it's very disconcerting for people who might read into stuff. So I think that's something that definitely should be addressed by our public appointment system. But we do expect to have more people join the Ability Programme. It's a 3-year programme, and I would like to see it on an ongoing basis and expanded probably much larger than we have. We also have the Employability Programme that are working with people that not necessarily have a disability but have a mental health issue from all ends of the scale, from people who have mild mental health issues to people who have very, very severe mental health issues. And that's now working in cooperation with HSE in every single HSE centre in the country, and it's working very successfully. So I know you can probably say you could never be exhaustive in the stuff that we're doing, but we have introduced a couple of new interventions in the last couple of years, particularly for people with extra challenges in their life. I don't have the figures on HAP. Oh, I do? Sorry. The combined 3 schemes, which is RAS, HAP and our own rent supplement, there's 18,900 people on the old RAS scheme, there's 22,600 people on rent supplement, and there are 45,700 people on HAP, which gives a total of 87,200 private rental tenancies supports in the country, which is just actually 26% of the private rental market.
The payout.
The combined total for the 3 schemes in this year's estimates are €688.4 million. Now, the back to work family dividend is not ending, no. The control measures. So we've had overpayments in 2018 of 107 million. The suspected fraud of that was 29.7 million, and the recoveries is 86.3 million. And the invalidity pension, how many of it is self-employed? So the legislature, oh no, that's not. Okay, I don't have those figures, Deputy, so I'll come back to you if that's okay. I think that's all.
Are you happy enough with that, Deputy O'Dea? Deputy Brady.
Thanks, Curran. Thanks, Minister, for that. And I have to commend the Department and yourself for putting that together. It makes the whole process a lot clearer, easier to follow, it has to be said. So thank you very much for that. Look, a lot of the questions I had asked or wanted to ask have been covered to some degree or another, but I just want to hone in on a couple there that have been asked already, just to get additional information. Just firstly, in relation to the 2012 changes changes to the pension and the impact and the recalculation process. You gave the figures there, 8,500 have received payment, another 24,000 have been contacted. That leaves in around about 50-odd thousand still to be contacted. I think there's another 11,000 have to get the initial correspondence from the department, so that leaves 61-odd thousand that haven't. No, well, there's about 50,000 anyway that still have to be reviewed. Have to be reviewed. So, can I just ask, how long is that process? What do you envisage that you will get to the end of that without actually going over say the other 24,000 that have to come back to the department to try fill in the gaps? So, you know, is there a time frame for all of that? And can we get an average payment? You say about 80% of the 8,500 have seen an uplift. And so, can we get an average as to what, you know, people are getting? And just in relation to the Christmas bonus, I have to agree with the Caherlock there in relation to that. Even the fact that it's called the Christmas bonus, I think it should, you know, you're talking about changing the names, you know, it's not a bonus. You know, people see it as a payment, you know, maybe the Christmas payment or something like that. But it shouldn't be a big question mark every year as to whether it's going to be paid or not. You know, and people need that certainty. So certainly that needs to be looked at. Just in relation to the hot school meals pilot scheme, now you did give a little bit of an update. Obviously the pilot scheme is ongoing. You want to expand it to 36 schools, and then you said you would like to see it then rolled out to a much wider audience. When you say a much wider audience, maybe if you could expand on that, because I think it's brilliant, it's great. You know, I would love to see it extended to every single school in the state, whether that's the type of audience you're talking about, or whether it's just desk schools at this stage, or what. So maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit in relation to that. And yeah, just to follow on from Deputy O'Dea there, the exceptional and urgent needs payments. When you have a look at 2018, what was contained in the estimates and what was actually spent, you know, the department, we actually spent more than what was estimated for. And yet this year, our estimates are significantly lower than 2018. So just to see what the explanation is for that. And again, look, we seem to raise it here on a continuous basis that, you know, the discretion that community welfare officers have from office to office is huge, and there doesn't seem to be any oversight in relation to that, you know. And I think last year it probably showed in relation to the illness benefit and the difficulties there, and, you know, the communication that came out. People go to their community welfare offices, some were given money, others weren't, and I know the department had sent out, you know, a memo to all CWOs that, you know, had to the payment should be made. But, you know, there does seem to be huge discrepancy from office to office. That's a massive concern to me. It's a massive concern to people out there as well. So I think it's something that needs to be looked at. Just in relation to our young job seekers, and I hear what you say there, you know, that the unemployment levels aren't going down as fast as you would like. They're at, what, 14.3% now, which is absolutely, you know, I wouldn't say extraordinary, but scandalous would be the proper word to use. And it actually shows that the discriminatory practice employed by the department, where our young job seekers are getting considerably less than people 26 years plus, shows that policy hasn't worked. And I think, you know, that is evidence of evidence needed that needs to be looked at, because we know the impact that, you know, that discretion or the discriminatory nature of those cuts to our young job seekers is having, whether it's in homelessness and right across the board. And I think all of that would be borne out if we ever got sight of the young job seekers report. So can I ask the question as to where is the report? Because, you know, I'm stating all of this, and, you know, I think the facts will bear all of that out when we see this report. Now, Minister, we were to see it in 2017. Here we are in 2019. Our, you know, job seeker, yeah, we're at 14.3%. That report is critical. We need to know when it is going to be published so we can actually scrutinise it and go through it in thorough detail. So can we get clarity on that? Just the final thing there, just in relation to illness benefit, and I mentioned it there briefly a minute ago, and obviously the huge issues that did plague the illness benefit last year, and I know you said a lot of things have been changed, procedures put in place and all of that. Now, hopefully it has been resolved. I'm not sure as to whether there have been any further issues or anything. I know some had come across my desk just after Christmas. I had sent them over to the department and yourself, and in fairness they had been dealt with quite speedily. Now, obviously, there was the big issue there with the GP is some GPs using the new system, others not, and you had said that all GPs you had hoped would, at this point, you know, be signed up, being using it. So can we just ask where exactly that is now at this point? So that's it, Curran, look, I think for now.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Johnny. So it's how long is a piece of string? I don't want to tell you that the reviews will be finished by the summer, because if we haven't got information from people, we're going to keep going and asking them for the information until they give it to us. I don't want to say that there's, you know, the reviews are going to close on the 1st of July and people not having, you know, people get envelopes and they put them in drawers, and sometimes you forget and you have good intentions to get back to you and it doesn't happen. So I'd like to tell you that it's going to be open-ended until everybody has their review and they're satisfied with it. I don't want to close it off. But what I think you're probably asking me is how quickly the ones should be getting their payment.
Yeah, I suppose, look, the 50,000, obviously some of them will be straightforward, you know, there'll be, I'd imagine, an automatic payment. Some will need to come back and fill in the gaps. So I suppose it's to go through the remaining 50,000 to, you know, to weed out the ones that might need a little bit more work and the ones that should be
So I think I'm actually probably guilty of giving you the impression that because there were people that we already had the information on, that somehow some computer was going to magically just, you know, zap it together. Everybody has to have a review. It has to go through a human's hands. And so even if I know that you had babies in 1972 and you had another one in 1989, and, you know, even if I can see that information, I still physically have to go through your review and then sign it off and say, Johnny, you're going from an 80% to a 100% pension, and here's the backdated, and to send you that details and send you that letter. So there's none of it, this is automated, which is why we took on 120 people. Some of it, actually, we would have hoped, probably not expected is the wrong word, we would have hoped to be able to do most of the interaction between people and the department online, which would have reduced the time because information could have gone back much quicker than by post and stuff. That doesn't suit some people of pensionable age, and so on that basis we got forms done, and the forms have been sent out, and it takes you a couple of weeks to send it back to me. So, like, there's 120 people in the office in Sligo. They're working all day, every day. They're doing the reviews as, you know, efficiently as they absolutely can. As I said, some 24,000 requests for information were sent out in the last couple of weeks. Over half of them haven't been replied to. I assume they'll come in. If they don't come in, we'll send more requests for information to them. The only people that probably will be automated are the people that we know won't get a change. And so there are people that, and unfortunately there are some gentlemen who we know didn't look after their babies because we can see they were out of the country, or we, you know. So, but again, that review has to take place, and we have to go to you and say, you know, we can see gaps in your history. You can invite you to come along and fill in those gaps, but the likelihood is that we already know what the gaps are. There's 55 million allocated to the budget this year, so I can't give you exactly details of that. 10 people went from 85% to 95%. Yeah, so there's an awful lot of people. 80% of the people who have applied so far are getting an uplift. Some 20% have no change. The vast majority are going to either a full pension or a 95% pension. But once it's complete, I'll be able to give you an exact breakdown, if that's okay, as to how many, how quickly, how, you know, wherever. But my intention is not to close it. And so I'm reluctant. I would like to think that in the main, the vast majority of people will be looked after before the summer. But I don't want to close it off in case for some reason somebody just hasn't gotten around to it, and we will continue.
Asking you to close it off
just
either,
that's,
so,
And on the same point,
Just on the same point, Minister, can I ask you, people who get an uplift, they're also entitled to arrears.
Oh, yeah.
Are we going to wait for the arrears payments?
Not at all.
How soon after
So
the
the day,
uplift will be?
if we use you as an example, let's say we reviewed you last week and you were moved from an 85% to a 100% mortgage pension. The following week's payment will reflect not only the uplift, but will include the backdated payment to the 30th of March last year.
Thank you.
I hope I put a smile on your face to say that for once, in a rare occasion, you and I are on the same page, because when I say to a much wider audience, and I'm sure if the Minister for Finance has listened to me, he'll have a heart attack. I mean, I don't treat children differently. I don't think we should segregate children because they go to a DEIS school or because they go to a different school. And actually, we don't do that in our current provision. So when you look at the cold school meals programme, when you look at the breakfast clubs, and we look at our after-school clubs, we don't just look after children in DEIS schools. There are an awful lot of schools that are not DEIS status that are involved in our programmes, which is why the pilot scheme, and I know it's only small, it's only 36 schools, some 7,200 kids. It won't be confined to DEIS, it is to, and the reason for that is my aim is, and maybe this is unusual coming from our department, is to get a better educational outturn. Children with good nutritional food get better advantages of the educational offering that they get from the state. I think we should sample that in small schools, in rural schools, in huge urban schools, in Gael schools. I think we should do, and that's what the pilot is going to hopefully have a look at, to pick a wide variety of different types and sizes of schools so that we can reflect, does it work much better in a school that has, you know, a catering company up the road? Does it work just as well in a small school in the Aran Islands? That kind of stuff. And so that pilot will go live in a couple of months, and we'll get those figures relatively quickly. And I don't intend to as well wait for years to make sure that the pilot is working. I think we'll know relatively quickly as to whether what our aim and ambition is going to bear out. The exceptional needs payments, yeah, they were reduced this year in the budget, insofar as that all of the types of payments that would be normally associated with an exceptional needs claim are also reducing. But as I said to you, if something happens, God forbid, it's not a scheme. And okay, I will be sitting here later on this year asking you for a supplementary budget to give me more money, and I hope we don't, obviously, but if that's the case, then that's the case. It's all demand-led. Oh yeah, sorry, okay. The youth unemployment, this is not an excuse. I think we genuinely need to do something specific over and above training and education for our young people, because some of the people who are on the long-term unemployed as young people have other challenges over and above maybe not having the right skill set. I think the YES programme is something that will be genuinely beneficial. We've only got a small number of people on it at the moment. I would expect to increase that number significantly at the end of the pilot project, which is 6 months. And the reason I say that is that when I look across Europe at the norms, our unemployment numbers and our long-term unemployment numbers are coming down at a much faster rate than the same kind of numbers in other European countries. But our youth unemployment across Europe is stubbornly static. And those other European countries don't have the same economic difficulties that we would have experienced in the last number of years, and yet they still have the same kind of stubbornly high youth unemployment numbers, and so it doesn't correlate to me. And so I know younger people today have different challenges in life than maybe we would have when we were growing up, and I think we need to genuinely address those challenges and put in the supports mechanisms around them, which is what I hope the YES programme will do. But I won't be able to tell you that until the pilot is over. But that's my aim, that's where I'm going. Because over and above, and I know you and I will differ on this, bringing the money back up to the same figure as you get if you're over 25 is not going to fix the problem. Fixing the problem is going to be finding jobs, sustainable jobs, that these young people can have.
Well, it's not going to fix the problem, but it will end the discrimination. Well,
now, you and I have a different view on that, so I'm not going to rehash that argument with you today. Do you know what's weird with regard to the next query that you raised? The same circular, the same training, the same policies, the same management protocols exist in every single office that we have around the country. And so I think I was in Clondalkin a couple of weeks ago, and there was a young lady there who came. She's with our department now a while, but she came from what would have been the old HSE community welfare system, and she was mindful of telling me how much more flexibility that she would have had in the old days. So she was citing to me that there's a policy now and that you have to stick within the policy framework, which is actually music to my ears. But what you're telling me is that you think some people have more discretion than others, and they shouldn't have. So there's a policy, there's a specific set of guidelines, the money is there if it's needed to be there. So somebody in Clondalkin shouldn't have a different view to somebody in Ratoath or somebody in Finglas. There should be a similarity of operation. And the only thing I can continue to do is to keep doing the continuous training programs that we do, and to keep maybe reminding people with the circulars as to what the policy is. But again, if you do know, and completely anonymously, if you know where there are examples of somebody that you think should be getting something and you think they're not, just let me know, and I can do behind the scenes, you know, snooping and just to see. The jobs report. Sorry. Yeah, we are waiting an awfully long time for this. We committed to doing the review and the report on the impact of reduced rates, but we can only do that when we get the report from Maynooth. And we haven't got it yet. Yeah, I know. So I tell you what I'll do, is what I might do today is we might just send them a little note and ask them, do they have any expectations as to when? And if they can't, maybe what we'll do is we'll do something different. Okay? And I come back to you.
Well, look,
Deputy Brady.
Just on that, 2 years, you know, look, I mean, I'm sure there must be a substantial, a considerable amount of work done on
an interim report.
An interim
No, but
report,
actually,
but you
there
know,
was
look, I mean, if the Minister is saying, look, we'll scrap
You'll be
that and
cooperative
start
today.
a different process,
You'll
you know.
be very
look,
cooperative today. An interim
Absolutely.
report would suffice.
But actually, Chair, we've actually received the interim report. Like, we got the interim report last December, and actually we discussed it here. The problem is that the interim report findings are very positive, and you don't agree with them, right? So
I haven't seen them.
now, the report was issued in December.
yeah.
Now,
Well,
it's not the completed report, but the interim report finds that it did incentivise people to go and further educate themselves and to further train themselves, which I know you don't subscribe to. But okay, I will send a note to see if we can get the final report, because obviously we all want the same thing, right, which is less young people unemployed and more people working at training. Illness benefits. I say this now and I'll goose it as soon as I say it. So no, thankfully everything has settled down, notwithstanding that there are people obviously every week who don't get a payment, but that's no different today than it would have been on the old system. And there's reasons why people don't get the payments, that a box is ticked incorrectly, or a GP filled in a wrong box, or somebody in my department might tick a wrong box on a screen. They're few and far between. We're still getting in excess of 50,000 applications every week and 50,000 payments every week. There's no problem with our call waiting numbers. There's calm and peace has been restored to the office, thankfully, because I think you're well aware that our staff went through a very stressful time through no fault of their own, and I'm grateful for their forbearance. But they're back to normal, and obviously we're going into a period where people are going to be less ill than they would be from the period that we've just come out of. So peace reigns at the moment. And hopefully
the issue with the GPs, is that all?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, again, you might have missed this. So we had formalised discussions with all of our GPs. A new contract was negotiated, which gave them a significant increase to the payments that they were receiving for the old illness certificate benefit or payments that they were giving us, which was probably long overdue insofar as that they hadn't received a different payment for many years. And when everybody's using the new forms and we're all happy out, and actually we're in negotiations to move to a newer type of certification system in the future. So good, peaceful, harmony relations are ongoing.
Have you more, Deputy Brady?
Is the Minister finished?
One last thing. No, that's the same thing. Sorry, I think so. Yep.
No, just one supplementary, and I should have mentioned it in the first time round. It was just in relation to the LES, the Local Employment Service, and I know we're going to be looking at it here as a committee, but I know that in the estimates, it's the same as 2018. That has to be welcomed, and I know the Minister would be acutely aware.
You didn't believe me when I said
well,
it.
look, look, there is massive concern out there, Minister, obviously based on the Indicon report, and you know, a lot of legitimate concern, and I hope I'll offer you this opportunity now to allay some of that concern, because you know, I won't get into the whole Indicon report because that's a separate piece of work that we are going to undertake. So look, I mean, I think it would be appreciative now if you were to allay that concern and say that the LES as is will remain to be the...
I've said it before, and I jest with you and I tell you didn't believe me, but I know you didn't believe me. I met with the ILDN just before Christmas. I went down to their annual conference. I spoke to them. I suppose when anybody issues a report or does a report on your work, and it isn't exactly to your liking, you're going to be afraid. But I absolutely assured them then. I think I've done it when we were at committee here a while ago before, but I'm very happy to do it again. The people in our partnership organisations, the ILDN, the people who run our jobs clubs, our LESs, our CV clubs, all provide huge and valuable services to the people who are unemployed in this country. That may change. It may, in the new iteration of activation that we need and supports that we need, that we're currently looking and assessing at the moment, because challenges today are different than they would have been. And I think the ILDN and their staff are particularly placed to address those challenges because they have access to other funds that don't come out of our department. And the funds, I mean, like SICAP and stuff like that will allow them to provide extended services around people who might have anxiety issues or, social discourse issues. There's a whole new range of issues facing people and challenges and barriers that are facing people between them having a job and not having a job today. The services that we provide as a state have to reflect those challenges and support those challenges. But the organisations that Indicon is about are one leg of a three-legged stool that we wouldn't be able to provide the services that we do, both historically and I absolutely know in the future, without the help, the support, the guidance, the intelligence, the empathy. They're a vital part of our service and they're not going anywhere.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I have just one or two quick questions. In relation to, you spoke about processing time for carers' allowance. What is the processing time for carers' benefit?
I don't know. Find out in a second.
It's an issue I was going to raise because we're coming across a lot of cases where, emergency situations arise, somebody gets a stroke, etc., and somebody suddenly has to leave work. And it's taken 12 weeks. It's taken 12 weeks to process the application, even though there isn't a means test.
But actually, I think, again, do most people make the assumption that the problem with adjudicating on a carer's application is because of money? Because most of the time it's not.
No. Specifically, Minister, in relation to carers' benefit,
yep.
And I've come across a number of cases, and they tend to be emergency type cases where an elderly person ends up in hospital, often as a result of a fall or a stroke or something, where they're not going to be able to go home without a carer. And somebody who's working applies for carers' benefit.
Yep.
And it takes an age to get that processed. And they're afraid to, they apply to take time off work, but they're afraid to take the time off because they don't know if they're going to get any payment. It seems to take forever. And because it's not a means tested, because it's contribution based, I can't understand with a medical report, somebody who's in a hospital, and why this can't be done in a week or two. Because and it's not.
The medical assessment process is exactly the same for both payments. It's not any different. And so just because I don't have to figure out whether you have income, rent, all that kind of good stuff, which is part of obviously the carer's allowance payment, a huge chunk of the delay is the interaction between our medical assessors and the documentation that's provided by applicants and their doctors with regard to whether you actually reach the medical assessment part of the application. And it's not different. It's no different for carers' benefit than it is for carers' allowance.
But well, it is causing difficulties because people are in that are specifically caught where they have a job and they're trying to take time out for a period, mainly the likes of falls and strokes with elderly people who can't then subsequently be discharged from a hospital or discharged maybe to a nursing home or something like that. But I've seen a number of cases in the last year alone, and I was surprised that
just to add to what the Chairman has said, you see, in my experience, it's taken about the same length of time to process a carer's benefit application as to process a carer's allowance application. That makes no sense because, there's a means test in the case of carer's allowance, which is a time-consuming process.
Well, actually, it doesn't. It's not to be contradicting you. So it takes our improved figures for carer's allowance has reduced from 19 weeks to 17 weeks. And I hope, obviously, with the extra additional staff that we've added in the last couple of weeks, that we will continue to see that falling. But it takes 12 weeks for a carer's benefit.
Carer's benefit, 12 weeks, yeah. It's a long time.
Just make the point that it's
Yeah.
proving
That's the
problematic
situation.
for people who are working.
Again, with respect, the medical evidence that needs to be provided, the bar or the floor, whatever way you want to look at it, is exactly the same. So it isn't easier for somebody to get carers benefit from a medical assessment perspective than it is for somebody who's getting carers allowance. And I genuinely would be very, very loath to have a situation where people who are in cons get dealt with faster than people who are not. I don't think that's something that I think we should ever...
No, well,
I think we should be improving both the wait times.
I'm just making the point specifically. I've seen people who have had a stroke who are incapable of going home from hospital, who are delayed discharges from hospitals, where the medical evidence would be very, very robust, but the ability of the department to process the medical evidence is the slowing factor, and something needs to be looked at there.
Again, you know what? Simply because it's time to... Well, actually, I suppose maybe you could probably argue that all of the cases are time dependent, that you don't apply for caring somebody unless they need care.
No, but it depends.
What I was going to say was that if somebody is waiting to be discharged out of hospital, maybe we should have a fast track, but then everybody would want to be on the fast track.
But not everybody is in hospital. Somebody might, like with the likes of Alzheimer's, dementia and whatever, you know, there isn't a day, a time where it's not like a stroke or something. But there are certainly, I've seen last year, with benefit in particular, a number of people who were hospitalised.
Let me have a look.
Yeah.
What I'd hate to do is to have a two-tier system that we would be treating people differently. But maybe there is a way around it. Yeah, let's have a look.
Minister, I have one or two other quick questions. Last year in the 2018 estimate for JobPath was 48 million, and it turned out the outturn was 71 million. In your opening statement, you indicated a significant drop in unemployment, the live register. Yet the estimate for 2019 is 57 million, so it's 10 or 11 million. While it's less than the outcome, it's still significantly more than the estimate you were doing this time last year. Do you want to explain why?
I think I can only explain to you that we probably didn't anticipate that JobsPath would be as successful as it was. Not that...
I suppose what I'm trying to get at is, I know the live, I suppose proportionate to the drop in the live register is the question I'm asking you. Like the live register, as you said, is down 75,000 over 2 years. So was that in that context?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, the purpose of JobsPath isn't just to get somebody a job, it's to make sure that they keep it and that we support them. So it's a kind of a holistic service. It isn't just about getting somebody their CV, sitting in front of an employer and making sure they get the job. It's making sure they maintain that and that sustainability within employment. And that's going to last much longer than the day after that they get the job. So there's the payments thereafter to hopefully keep people in their jobs and so that they can then go off and not need support and sustainability afterwards. I don't think we ever anticipated JobPath to be as successful as they were. They exceeded our expectations last year. We still have 193,000 people on the unemployment register. It's my job and our collective job to make sure that those people find jobs in an environment where there are more jobs than there are people at the moment. And so whatever and every support that people need to be able to get the jobs that are readily available today, and we have a jobs a jobs fair down in Dublin Castle tomorrow, that again I know I will go to, and there will be far more employers with work than there will be for people to fill that work. And so we need to continue to make sure that whatever support is available to people who can't currently get work, that we help them to try and get work.
Minister, I'm going to make a comment to you, and you can reply or not, but I was taken when you were making the opening statement. You talked about people, who remain unemployed, and whether they were young or old. And we're at a stage where you rightly say there are jobs out there, and it's more than just equipping individuals. And I know you're only the minister for one department, and an awful lot of our solutions have to be cross-department to be really effective. But we have had, for generations, intergenerational unemployment. And we have unemployment geographically black spots. And I think more than just supporting the individuals, a range of programmes across government need to be devised to lift those communities where we've long-term unemployment and intergenerational. And that's why the likes of what you're doing with the school meals is only one element. But if you look at, the recent reports published in relation to DESH, children attending a DESH school still are some way behind non-DESH schools in terms of outcomes, and so there is quite a considerable way to go to positively discriminate for those communities that are experiencing long-term intergenerational unemployment. And while you have a role to play in it, and I'm not having a go at you, Minister, it requires other departments to work with you. And I think there is, and maybe we've missed it before, but I think as an economy where you have jobs, where you're almost at full employment, there is an opportunity to drive that, and for once and all, give people an opportunity, not just an opportunity, the opportunity is there, but to make the opportunity a reality for people to work, and they break that cycle.
And I will respond if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I can't think of the lady's name at the moment, but she was the lady that we employed to do the policing report for us. Does anybody remember her name? She was an Irish-American lady. She came and she did the Future of Policing report. Anyway, sorry, I can't remember.
I know who you're talking.
It'll come to one of us, right? She did a presentation a number of months ago when she did the Future of Policing report, and she based, now I know that's just about policing, right, but some of the connectedness of the issues that we all experience and see in our towns and villages. Kathleen O'Toole, thank you very much. She cited examples that she did in Seattle, in Boston, in New York, that worked. And what they did was they put together task forces of interdepartmental agencies. And so instead of going into an area where there was deprivation or a drugs issue or lack of educational opportunities, or, they went into an area and took 1,000 people. And there was 5 or 6 different departments sitting around the table, and they just specifically looked at those 1,000 people and said, right, what can we do for the mums? What can we do for the husbands? Do they need work? Do they need to be training? There's 2 young fellas in the family that have problems with drink. They looked holistically at a community and decided that this is what needs to be done to actually help this community. And they all got together and collectively did their little bit, specifically targeted for one set of people. And she cited the example of a particular area in New York where there was particularly high crime. So that was the argument that she was coming from, and the angle that they were coming from was the crime. And when they looked after this group of people for 6 months, the crime rates reduced by over 1,000%, because all of the people were actually getting the supports and the service that they actually required to have a better quality of life. And also her other recommendation was that it shouldn't be led by the Department of Justice, and it shouldn't be led by An Garda Síochána. And so it is something, I think, that when we launch, and you'll all be invited in May, when we launch the new National Action Plan for Social Inclusion, I'd like for us to take, and I am only one department, and so it very much does depend on the cooperation, and anything you can do to help me do that would be grateful, is to get a number of departments to pick a number of areas and do task force so that we can see, does it work here? And if it does work here, then to actually have a national programme of holistically looking at issues that do range from as something small as our younger people maybe growing up not knowing how to cook for themselves and teaching people skills, to providing educational, to helping people with addictions, to talking to people with social anxieties, to helping mothers who haven't worked for years to have the confidence to go back to all of the things that might be affecting particular issues, and particularly, as you say, the intergenerational issues, because I know we started last year the programme to look at jobless households, and I know we're only doing it on a voluntary basis because we can't do it in any other way. But because people don't know any different, they're not really volunteering to come in and to work with us, and so we need to look at it, I think, in a different way. So,
okay. Anybody else? Colleagues, are you all complete? Minister, thank you very much for attending today. That concludes consideration of the revised estimate for Vote 37, Employment Affairs and Social Protection. In accordance with Standing Order 90, a message to that effect will be sent to the Clerk of the Dáil. Minister, I'd like to thank you and your officials once again, and the Select Committee is now adjourned.